It's been a couple of years since I featured Minion Masters on this channel, and since my initial video was more of a first impressions video, largely due to the fact that this is a live service type game, and 4 years of live service updates later, one can hardly expect said original video to remain entirely accurate, so I thought it'd be fun to go back in with a relatively new lens, a new perspective. For those of you unfamiliar with Minion Masters, it's essentially a card-based MOBA. If I were to make a very general comparison, the gameplay formula is probably what you'd get if you combined Heroes of the Storm and Hearthstone into one single game, and shrank down the arena size to basically look like a small soccer field, albeit with 2 small MOBA lanes to funnel most of your NPCs through. Minion Masters is one of those games where it's very easy to learn, but very difficult to master. Minion Masters is, at its core, a competitive PvP game, one that involves a certain degree of strategy, but mainly far more in the vein of direct brute force. While there are moves and counter moves, once you basically find yourself having an advantage, it's not a bad idea in most cases to go all out in punishing your opponent as fiercely as possible before they potentially regain the ability to retaliate in any meaningful way. Unlike a lot of other competitive games where you spend your first hour or two proving yourself before the game designates you into a certain competitive tier of play based on your individual skill, here in Minion Masters you start at the bottom of the competitive ladder in the wood tier, and you work your way up. I tend to fluctuate between the gold and platinum tiers, which are basically your middle tier options, the halfway markers on the competitive ladder. Normally I would say that the secret to winning a card-based game like this is to ensure your deck is evenly balanced, with a fair number of offensive, defensive, and utility-based cards. While ensuring good positioning for your troops and defenses is absolutely a critical component towards increasing the likelihood of victory, what cards you bring into the battle and what cards your opponent brings with them may have just as great an influence over the outcome of said battle. It's worth noting that these cards are unlockable either through grinding for currency, through playing match after match after match, and also by leveling up your rank in the current seasonal battle pass, either for free or for paid if you choose to buy into it, because this game does absolutely have a paid battle pass option, and the currency you get for both the free and premium versions absolutely have a direct effect on gameplay. During the dozen or so additional hours I put into replaying Minion Masters through, I never felt pressured to buy premium currency or premium items in order to quickly bypass the grind. But then again, I actually enjoyed most of said grind. All that said, going back to the concept of cards in general, I would probably say that while it is important, as is the general idea of play and counterplay, what will ultimately win you a match is your ability to spam minions against your enemy at a faster rate than your enemy is able to spam them at you. That you can only pull off by ensuring sustained control of the 2 different midfield lanes at the top and bottom of the map. This isn't a slow, methodical game of chess between the 2 sides, this is about fast-paced domination. Knowing how to end the battle quickly is far more important than ensuring a slower-paced, sustained war while you both gear up for the endgame. Holding one or both of the points of interest will charge up your main tower and influence how quickly you can play cards, with each card requiring a certain amount of charge behind it, represented by a numerical value on the face of said card. Once your tower levels up to the final phase, you enter Mana Frenzy mode, which greatly multiplies the rate at which your tower can charge card energy, allowing you to spam minions basically non-stop at the enemy. Few things are as chaotic or stressful in Minion Masters as having both you and your enemy enter Mana Frenzy mode at or around the same time. Having each side go from having 5 or 6 units on the field at any given time to having 12 or 13 makes quite a bit of difference, especially when you, in addition to spawning units, also oftentimes have to send healing towards your existing units, while also launching your own direct player-controlled offensive attacks at enemy minions or the enemy tower, such as my preferred modus operandi being a energy beam of doom from above. Because oftentimes it's only one side that enters Minion Frenzy and the other usually isn't close enough to enter at the same time in order to level the field, lots of times the match will usually end within 30 seconds of that one side entering Mana Frenzy mode. It is the typical endgame stage of the match. If somehow you're able to enter Mana Frenzy and still somehow lose the match, either it was because you were already hanging on with your fingertips, or you're the unluckiest player in the world, because it is ridiculously easy to win with Mana Frenzy on your side. This metagame of having a really slow opening followed by a more moderately paced mid-game clash over the 2 control points, followed by an outright barrage at the end, creates what's in most instances a really fun albeit predictable gameplay loop. I think another one of the reasons the in-game experience can often be so satisfying is because the matches themselves, as well as the average waiting queue length, are both ridiculously short. The longest I've ever had to wait to get into a PvP match was less than 30 seconds. In most cases, I'd be waiting for only 5 to 7 seconds, if that. If I were to play something like Overwatch, waiting 7 minutes to enter a gold or a platinum match wouldn't be unheard of, especially if you're queuing as a DPS, which might have you waiting at least 10 or 15 minutes, if not longer. So the idea of only waiting 5 or 7 seconds to hop into a match is almost something of a luxury for a player like me. Two of the factors that largely contribute towards this is the fact that number one, Minion Masters is free to play, which can noticeably expand the size of your concurrent player base, and number two, it features cross-play for both PC and Xbox. I believe the developers have said that they plan to expand this beyond those two platforms, but I don't know for a certainty whether or not they've already begun doing that yet. For the most part, my time in game was mostly spent playing in 1v1 PvP matches. Although I did put an additional hour or two into playing 2v2 PvP with a friend against other public matchmaking duo teams. And I've got to say, I was a little bit concerned about how well or how poorly the game would handle PvP if it was designed for both solo and team play. From my albeit casual, more limited experience with the genre, MOBAs aren't like other genres, such as FPS games where the expectation there would be that the game is going to offer a lot of different game modes, and variety within those game modes. There's a certain rigidity in a lot of the general game design behind most MOBAs, which isn't a bad thing, but in most cases it's almost exclusively team-based. While there are usually many opportunities for individual players to stand out as a result of their individual skill, the success or failure of any given match is usually due to how well the winning team worked together, compared to the losing team. You can't just single-handedly carry in a 5v5 MOBA as easily as you can in something like CSGO, for example. So the idea of shrinking everything down to fit a 1v1 or 2v2 game mode, including the arena itself, is very interesting. It makes the game a lot easier in a way for newcomers to the MOBA genre to become invested in. Here you're really unlikely to find yourself overwhelmed by the amount of statistical information that normally would be present in the often archaic and unintuitive UI in most traditional MOBAs. I should probably mention in passing that Minion Masters as a free-to-play game does support itself through the implementation of microtransactions and premium currency, which I think I mentioned earlier, which can be spent on premium items, and oftentimes upon either launching the game or when exiting a match and returning to the main menu, you'll be spammed with pop-up windows in-game showing advertisements for the aforementioned season passes and premium currency, among other things. I've recently criticized other games like Diablo Immortal or The Walking Zombie 2 for excessively monetizing the player's in-game experience, but one of the key dividing lines between those examples and this is that number one, those games sucked ass in almost every conceivable way, and number two, those games would often deliberately mislead and manipulate players in their implementation of those microtransactions, and the companies behind those games would attempt to cover up the enormous scale of those monetization practices. Also, there was the added problem of how many of those commercial premium items offered direct in-game advantages for the player, creating variations of a pay-to-play premium pyramid. Minion Masters just doesn't do that. If you choose to play as a strictly free-to-play player, as I did, you have just as great a chance to win a match as someone who buys into the premium stuff like the Season Pass. The scales are not inherently tipped against you. So, what have we learned here today? We've learned that microtransactions in general can often suck, but games like Diablo Immortal and The Walking Zombie 2 can impale themselves on their own flagpole. Overall, I doubt Minion Masters will ever become one of my regular top-tier go-to games. As there are ever so many hours in the day, I tend to stick with a core group of 5 or 6 of my favorite online games, and I don't quite see Minion Masters taking the place of one of my existing candidates. But for someone who doesn't play a lot of MOBAs and is largely indifferent to the diehard MOBA genre as a whole, Minion Masters is one of, if not the number one, best MOBA game to consider playing if you're someone who doesn't want to dive into the traditional and far more complicated MOBA games that overwhelmingly saturate that particular market. Since it is free, there is no upfront cost, and the microtransactions are not really all that obtrusive, which is honestly refreshing these days, given how now not only free-to-play games but also paid games too seem filled to the brim with microtransaction bullshit. There's really no reason not to play unless the game just doesn't interest you, in which case that's entirely fair. But those are just my thoughts, and that's where I think I'm going to wrap it up for today. As ever, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to click the like button and comment below what you think of the game. Comments really help my videos get boosted in the YouTube algorithms, and plus I read and respond to nearly all the comments I get, so even if you want to drop me a comment just to say hi or get my opinion on something, even if it's unrelated, I'll be more than happy to chat with you there. Likewise, subscribing and clicking the bell really helps. I know it's cliche, but the YouTube algorithm is a pain in the ass to deal with, doubly so when you're a small channel like me. Also, there's the small fact that I'm inching ever closer to 2,000 subs, and I'd kind of like to hit 2,000 subscribers sooner rather than later, because, you know, yay, that'd be a good number. I like my big numbers. This is Warrior Dan signing out. Stay awesome, everybody. Stay safe, and peace out.